Good morning, Wade.
Good morning, Rob.
Got your coffee?
I have a quick question for you.
Fire away, buddy.
What is your favorite number, 7 or potato?
I was going to go for 69, but I'll take the 7. Why?
We'll come back to that. So how's life treating you today?
Really intense, really amazing, because a lot of things happening for us. We are on the verge of the last stretch before TarotCon 2024. It's bigger than ever. It's badder than ever. A lot of interesting people coming. Marcus Katz coming back with some great new souls joining. People like renowned author Naomi Ozaniek, and even some people that we know personally who aren't going to be talking at TarotCon are flying in just to support the event. So it seems to be a very interesting thing happening. A lot of pre-TarotCon events happening. So for those of you out there in the Philippines who want to be part of it, just go to tarotconph.com and get your tickets there, and this is going to change the game. So before we start, buddy, this is just the Magic.tv presents. There's no guests. There's really no agenda on the table. But, hello, Facebook user said good morning. Who's saying good morning to us? We don't know who you are, but good morning to you. All right, so that being said, one of the things we can talk about is just look through some books, some plugging, some promotions, even do some reviews every now and then. And I just got my hands on the second book of your student, BJ Swain. I think it was the first, but this is my second copy. I got my hands on a copy of his Living Spirits, A Guide to Magic in the World of Spirits. Okay? And I got to say, BJ is an incredibly educated author. This in itself is a toolbox of many essential techniques. He's well-read. He's articulate. His processes. I love how he lays it out. If you learned that from you, kudos to you. It's like he's not one of those asshole writers, if you know what I mean, where like they're just trying to sound smart. He knows his stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
I saw that when I got his other book, the one about familiars, Familiarize Me. I forgot its name. Maybe BJ, forgive me if I said it wrong. The only thing about it is, as a book publisher and as a marketing guy myself and an events coordinator, as I was telling you earlier, I asked for some bacon and I got the whole damn pig with this. In other words, It was good. It was a bit too good.
The word exhaustive comes to mind.
Yeah. And I'm not discrediting the content. The content is just to die for. I'm just kind of feeling a little bit of a missed opportunity here, because this book in itself, Living Spirits, could have easily been 3, even up to 5 books. It had such great content. Like, I keep on jumping back and forth to his working with Hecate in here. And then there's something to do with Hecate. There's the ritual preparation. It's very ironed out. But the thing is, it's so much that, like, the term you and I agree to use is it's very chewy, right?
Extremely chewy.
So
it's almost to the point that I would think it's definitely not an entry level work on Goetia. This is like a master's thesis on Goetia, because I would think it would even, just the density of the book would almost discourage new students, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah,
but like you say, it could have been more books. It could have been a series.
Yeah, I'm very much inclined to agree with that, Wade. The only thing I'm saying about it, it is definitely not meant for a beginner. I think this book is really meant for occultists, like those who are already practicing. But one thing nowadays, I'm trying to get it out of people's heads that being an occult author or practitioner in the occult makes you dirt poor. You know what I mean? Guys, boys and girls, let me be the first to tell you, there's money to be made out there, but you got to know how to package your stuff properly. If I could make a living teaching tarot, writing books, offering courses and services in the Philippines, where it's kind of semi against the culture, I guarantee you that people like BJ and others like them, even yourself included, could make a very handsome living teaching what you know if packaged properly. And the negative thing I have to say about this book only is that it focuses more on the occultists and less on the beginners or anybody who wants to get into it, that they'd have a hard time keeping up with it. And if BG just kind of chopped it down a little bit, instead of giving us the whole pig, actually carved out pieces like what example Marcos Visconti would do, or what like even Lon would do, then you potentially invite a new audience to appreciate your work. You know what I'm saying? Tell me I'm wrong about that.
No, that is spot on. It just, I actually got, when you were describing it, I got the impression of like the Dick and Jane books, like, you know, Blues Clues for Goetic Magic, you know, like a children's book of how to summon demons. And I thought that would actually be a whole lot of fun.
Because, like, you know, in this book, like, what I liked about it is that if you really want to know how to work with your ancestors, you got something there. You want to work with demonic entities, you got stuff there. You want to work with theurgic entities, you got it there. It's wow. But again, you're putting you're putting top grade Chinese food with top grade Tex-Mex with top grade Russian food. It can't be properly appreciated. So, I mean, like, I would implore BJ, as somebody I respect, instead of putting out a monstrous tome like this, which in effect would be appreciated by a smaller few, he could have just literally just chopped it down and published smaller books or smaller, tinier books and made more money and reached more people. Tell me if you agree with that.
Oh no, that's spot on. He is a genuine intellectual. Mm-hmm. He will go neck deep on pretty much anything. I mean, I didn't teach him this. I gave him the basics of Goetic magic. We talked about it. We went through like a lot of and he just ran with it.
Yeah.
It was like a lot of things. When I can always tell when I have a really good apprentice, because it's almost like I'm not teaching them something. It's almost like I'm just reminding them of it.
Very true.
Like it's a refresher course. Barrett was the same way.
And it's the same thing here, like even with his paginations. Like, in other words, the content per page. All right. I think nowadays, most of the people, especially who are new to these things, we have an entire generation of ADHD people. Okay. And I'm not comparing. I'm not saying my work is better or his work is better. But if you see how I did it with the Tarot 78 book, where I captivated you with one thing, with picture, with big words to capture the ADHD in people so that they can actually absorb it. You don't want some 16-year-old who likes the occult to say, words. You know what I mean? It's like, because this is a gem. This is really a gem. Like, honestly speaking, BJ, if you want to sit down and talk, like, okay, Rob, I'm going to give you a shot. How would you repackage my book? Dude, I could make a series of this with art, with word art, with layouts. And dude, you could make this even like a subscription service. That's how good this stuff is. So BJ, again, this is fantastic. I'm curious to know what your third book is going to be. You've had this, you had the familiar book. I don't know if you have others, but you have a good student there, Wade.
It almost reminds me of the True and Faithful, the John Dee's book, the True and Faithful Relation. People would come into Ancient Ways and they would look, they were like, oh yeah, I'm looking for, because the craft had just come out. They're like, I'm looking for the book, the big book with all the magic. And I pull this out and it's got the terrible handwriting with the terrible Latin, and it's just page after page of dense script and then diagrams and then more dense script. And I just watched their eyes glaze over as their whole brain hole shut down.
Yeah, they don't want
and I could see someone like picking this book and being like, wow, this is great. And then just being like, oh, and not quite ready for this level of academic exploration.
And commitment. And you know what? I'll give also credit to another author who did it right with his first book, was Denny of Foolish Fish, when he came out with his Hidden Paths. That book was so impressive that when my son started asking me questions about magic, I said, you know what? Look at this book. Anything you have to ask me most likely is answered there. You could get your answer in a couple of pages. And if you have anything else you want to ask, then talk to me. And woe and behold, my son took it from me. You know what I mean? So, and I liked how it was laid out, because like, okay, number one, the pages weren't too overwhelming. The content wasn't too overwhelming. It was just enough. Because the point I'm trying to get at is I love the passion in the work. This kind of passion needs to be translated into more of like a beginner's audience, because this is what people need. Remember that book we did a review of, the one that the great people from Anathema sent us, The Dancing Sorcerer by P.T. Misselberger? Yes. Jackpot. P.T. Misselberger just nailed the he hit the nail on the head with that, on how he presented it. It was not chewy. It was like a perfectly cooked steak. I loved it. I mean,
well, it was very accessible, and I think that there's room for that. There's a market for that, because it used to be, even back in the 90s, it wasn't mainstream. Magic was very much the exclusive domain of nerds and weirdos.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, especially since we've been having movies about, we had like, The Craft, and then was it Practical Magic, and we had a bunch of other movies that kind of brought it out in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
People started getting interested in it, but now we're having to write for a broader audience.
True, agree with you on that. Like shout out to Marco Visconti for what he did, because I asked him before we interviewed him. I said, in this book of yours, in the Aleister Crowley manual, will you be talking about rituals like Duat or Pyramidos? He was like, no. This is for those who want to get into it. Marco could have talked about it. He could have talked about it till the cows come home. But he made it something that was more accessible to people. And in the future, if you ask me, for teachers, writers, authors, that is the way forward. I'm not saying dumb down your work. I'm saying that there's work where you got to be a little bit elementary. And if one day you got to write a book that's just like very rectal, it's like, hey, get ready to have the coffee because reading this book, it's all there. I mean, like, I know what I'm getting into when I read a Stephen Skinner book. You know what I mean? It's not going to be reading on the beach. It's in the library. You know what I mean? With the nice lamp and a cup of coffee, because it's very, very, very academic. But I've also seen books of people like Skinner that are a little bit, more lax. I mean, a lot of his feng shui books are like that. So how do I say, ultimately speaking, I think authors nowadays need to go in both directions. They could say, all right, this, if you wanted to do it like this could be like level 7. But for the level 1, if I knew nothing about magic, he might lose me. Not because it's a bad book, but because it's not as beginner friendly as it should be for a topic which I think is essential for mages around the world.
And also, some people would say, well, I don't think that level 1 people need to be summoning spirits and all. You know what? Honestly, I think people should. It's a magical technique. It's a tool in your toolbox. I think everybody should be able to do it.
True.
Just maybe, like you were saying, there's some of the things that should be more advanced, like Pyramidos.
Yeah.
Maybe don't start with Pyramidos, in terms of your rituals that you use.
Somebody's asking, would you gentlemen give me the name of B.J. Swain's book again? This one is Living Spirits, a guide to magic in a world of spirits. And he also has his book on familiars, which
this is Heather, by the way.
Huh? Oh, hi, Heather.
This is Heather, by the way.
This is really worth it if you are genuinely interested in furthering your magical studies. It's just, if you know nothing about magic, you might end up saying, hey, I read this book by B.J. Swain. I didn't get it. You know what I mean? And you'll end up tuning into our show. So, B.J., again, you got a promising career for you as an author. Can't wait to have you on the show. I really respect what you've put out there. I mean, I just want to see you get more money. Simple as that. Just as simple as that. I mean, I want your message to be more accessible to the world. I am not at all questioning the content. I'm just saying that with this prime pig we had, we could have chopped it up better and gotten more from the slices. So take it or leave it. That's my input as a marketing guy. So today's topic, we're talking about crossing the abyss. Wow. You really pulled the magic out of the hat, didn't you, Wade? That's why I like rearrange the chair and shit. All right. So let's do it.
Well, I remembered when I was a wee tot and I was first reading Crowley, and he would talk about that, and I thought, ooh, that sounds like a great adventure. I want to try that. And he never really described what it was going to do to you or any of this. It was really just an academic concept at the time, because I'm reading this and it's like, oh, well, I guess that's sort of like your final test or whatever. That's like your final exam or your black belt or whatever it is you want to do. Mm-hmm. And everybody has this ambition of like, oh, I want to be the greatest. I want to be like the greatest magician that ever was in the history of anything, because that's how kids think of stuff. And so I started reading some of his stuff on it, And I realized that this also kind of crossed over into other things that I had read. Whether or not you believe Carlos Castaneda's work is genuine or fictional, he actually covers a lot of very clear shamanic concepts, and the Eagle's Gift deals with this exact thing. There's another one of his students that did a book called The Sorcerer's Crossing, which deals with this directly from a very different perspective.
For practicing what I preach, we might have some newcomers out there. What is the crossing of the abyss? Let's explain it to them as simple as possible.
Wow. It's basically a stage in your magical evolution. Like you're doing the apprentice work when you're learning, practical magic and becoming an adept of actual magical power. And then you cross your first big veil when you achieve knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel. That's when you kind of pass from, apprentice into adept. And you become, the various adept grades are about your interactions with your holy guardian angel, discovering your true will, all that other good stuff. And then there's the next great veil, crossing the abyss. And it's sort of like, I want to find exactly the right metaphor for this. It's sort of like there's a little hidden core inside yourself. So when you find, say if you're driving a car and you have no idea how the car works, you're going along, and then at one point you discover the engine and the whole drivetrain. And you're like, oh, that's what makes this whole thing work. So you've got the car and you've got your drivetrain as you're going. At some point, you can basically leave the entire car behind and just have the drivetrain. That's what crossing the abyss is like.
Somebody's asking here, and we're going to get to this point, as a non-Crowleyan, would you equate crossing the abyss with the dark night of the soul and other traditions? I have my own take on this, but I'd like to hear yours.
Yes and no. There's a lot of people go through a dark night of this. You know what? I'm going to actually hear your take on the dark night of the soul before I get on to how it kind of jives in mine.
All right. The whole dark night of the soul, the difference between what that's stating, the actual reality, is dark nights of the soul, because these are thresholds to the next level of our evolution. You could go through one of the worst dark nights of the soul at 17, and at 28 go through another one that's even more. In other words, it's the next level boss, and with each level comes new skills, new spells, new magic, new equipment. But the thing is, we need these dark nights of the soul to continuously push ourselves. If not, we stagnate. They suck. They're painful. They're devastating. And some people don't get out of it. But personally, I do not think that the dark night of the soul is equated to the abyss or crossing the abyss. Because kind of like crossing the abyss is, if a dark night of the soul is like a battle, a horrible battle in war, like you got shipped off during World War II, and you fought on all these great battles. Every time you won those battles, you have won a dark night of the soul. Crossing the abyss is coming home from the war. It's done. You kind of know it, and you kind of brought back that reality with you. Now, I want to hear your take on it.
Okay. It actually relates to the various orders of the Golden Dawn. They have the Rose Cross, the Golden Dawn, the Silver Star, but these are actual experiences you go through. When you realize, when you encounter your holy guardian angel, it's like seeing the sun for the first time. It's this massive dominating light that makes everything in your life operate, that makes everything grow.
It's plugging in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like literally the golden dawn. The sun comes up, and you're like, "Oh my God, how have I never seen this? My entire life, everything is just blazing in the light of this of the sun, and it's this massive. It's Tifereth. It's this massive, overwhelming experience that you have. Now, if the very as you pass through Dark Night of the Soul experiences through your life, crossing the abyss is almost like an endless night. When you realize that star, that sun, that dominated your entire life is really just one rather mediocre star in the entire universe. When you get beyond that, that's the Order of the Silver Star. That's when you realize, like, I am one star in the company of stars.
It's like divine realization.
Exactly. It's like when you move beyond it and you realize, like, wow, there is a whole, and you leave the whole idea of Earth and all the other mundane stuff just becomes secondary.
But here's the thing I want to ask you, though, Wade. Okay, I think you're talking about the result of crossing the abyss.
This is the result, yes.
But let's talk about the crossing itself, because there's a lot of creepy shit out there. Now, first and foremost, I think it's prudent for us to say that the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel is not the same as crossing the abyss. True?
No. It's essential.
Yeah, it's essential, but it's not true.
If you don't have that, you're just gonna go nuts.
Yeah, because like the thing is, some people say, "Well, I did the Abra Melin, so did I cross the abyss?" No, you just have the biggest ally in your corner. Now, the thing I'm going to say, the next thing I'm going to say is this: the crossing of the abyss, and this is one thing I want to kind of tickle your imagination on, because we talked about this privately a week ago. Could crossing the abyss be the realization of your mystical identity away from the magical? Because think about it, everything you said is kind of just like, I'm plugged in, I surrender, versus magic is very will focused, me centric. So tell me, am I wrong to assume that?
It's there's me, and then there's I. I might not be making this clear. You have your identity, the person you've been your entire life, and I always look at that like you've been taken hostage. You're in an enemy camp. They give you a new name and they give you a new job, and that's what you grow up believing you are. Mm-hmm. But you were someone before then, before you became imprisoned here. So when you achieve knowledge and conversation, you have an external view of that. You're saying, oh, there is an encounter. I'm encountering my true self. That's this other person.
More than who I was told it was.
Right. You're externalizing your holy guardian angel, and crossing the abyss is when you internalize that, when you shift your eye from here to there, and you kind of leave the rest of it. It's like, oh yeah, that's Wade's thing. That's something that he has going on with whatever. I'm doing something different. So it's almost like a shift in consciousness from to who you're supposed to be.
I kind of get what you're saying. It's like ugly duckling syndrome, right? Where growing up, the chick thought it was an ugly duckling, but all along it was told by everyone, you're the ugliest duckling of all of us. So it accepted the reality of the duckling, when in fact it came to the realization it was actually a swan. It was more than what it was told. So in other words, it's breaking past the ego, it's breaking past the constructs and seeing the unlimited potential within you. Is that correct?
It's very close. It's good enough. Mm-hmm. It's to the point where you actually understand your true self. Now, I pulled up Crowley's Liber Os Abysmi, Veldat, and what he recommends, with the way that he has people do it, is starting with pure logic, without using any magic or mysticism, and he has you explore these logical contradictions. He recommends Kant's antinomies,
yes,
which I find fascinating myself. But without the use of mysticism, they're very difficult to make sense of. For example, he would say, well, thesis, the universe is finite in space and time, versus the antithesis of the universe is infinite in space and time. So how are these both true? And you have to sit and actually think about it from a logical perspective. Now, Crowley was limited in what he was doing. Go ahead.
Before I forget, is this the precursor to the chaos magic theory of neither? You remember that?
Yes. Honestly, there was what was it? The Principia Discordia contained a lot of it was pretty much written as a goof, but there was a lot of statements in it, like when the guy would say, well, yeah, everything is true. He said, well, how is that possible? He said, well, everything is true. He said, what about false things? Even false things are true. He said, well, how can that be? Well, don't ask me. I didn't do it. That's a great answer.
For those of you who are wondering what neither is, there is a very good gnosis theory that was, look it up, that was perpetuated by the chaos magics of the early 90s or 70s to 90s of neither. So like example, you say, are you good? You are neither good. You are neither evil. You're neither of the both. Neither. I'm not good. I'm not evil. I'm neither of both. I am something that is not definable by these constructs. And the level of just intellectual freedom and energetic freedom you have by knowing you're not bound those things. It's like if you say, Rob, are you a Republican or a Democrat? I could say I identify as a Republican, but if I'm not a Republican, does that make me a Democrat? Not necessarily. That's where the neither comes into play. That something else comes out of it because you're not identifying as either. Now, I want to go back to something before I forget. We got some people throwing down some cool stuff. Okay, so finding yours, that you are an eternal soul and spark of God rather than your limited being in any lifetime in the limited 3D realm. That's close, because there's going to come something with that about like our definitions of what God is. There's like this book I'm reading right now, Beyond the Cloud of Something. I got it from I think it was Denis who recommended it to me, and it's telling us that how we perceive God, especially as Christians, is not correct. Like the way we understand God, that we were told, that we were trained, is not the proper way of understanding it, and that there's another way. So like imagine it like this. The best way of looking at it would be like this. Imagine if all of a sudden in Star Wars, all of the Jedi found out that the light side, as they called it, was actually the dark side, or it was actually not the light side at all, that the Force said that's not the light at all. So imagine that kind of holy shit moment you get. That like, well, then what is? You know what I mean? Are you going to follow dogma, or are you going to follow the truth? Now, going back to what I was going to ask you about the crossing of the abyss, why have we heard so many nightmare stories about it? About people losing their mind, about people breaking down?
Well, because it's like a lot of these things are saying we're getting close. It's logically impossible to hit it right on the head. Every account of the abyss, every account of the techniques used to get, it's a person doing this when they were going, hey, this way. And so you're looking at, it's almost like people standing in a circle, everyone's pointing at the center, but you can't see the center.
Yeah.
So you have to like go and see all of the clues pointing in, and then you realize like, oh, there's no path there. I just have to kind of fall. So what you end up hearing with a lot of the nightmare stories is people who have not been prepared, aren't doing it correctly, or are attached to the result.
Attached, yes. They're too attached to the matrix that when the whole reality of what they get from the attempt at crossing the bit breaks all these things down, they don't have anything to hold on to anymore. Is that correct?
It's close. It's
close, yeah. That's the truth, man. To be honest, there's really no way for all you viewers out there, there's really no way for all of us to say that this is exactly how it is. Because the next thing I'm going to get at this, people assume that like, well, okay, you told me something to the extent of I need to do something called like my knowledge and conversation in order to prepare for the abyss crossing. All right. But a lot of people think that, oh, does that mean I need to do the Abra Melin? What's your take?
Well, you have to have knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel. Maybe not maybe not by that specific name, but there's a lot of shamanic traditions. There's a lot of magical traditions that will give you the same experience without necessarily having performed the Abra Melin.
Okay, so we're saying that the Abra Melin, we said this before with Dr. Jeremy Weiss, God bless his soul. The Abra Melin is a way. It is not the only way, correct?
Yes, it's a way.
Okay, here's the next thing I'm going to ask you. Does the knowledge and conversation, whole shebang of it, is it necessary to undergo it in a systematic level, or can this be given spontaneously through life experiences? Like, do I...
Oh, it originated spontaneously through life experiences. Mm-hmm. This was something that Ebony had told me about baptism, which he had discovered as actually growing up in the South when they used to do real baptisms. You've heard about stories about John the Baptist, about why he was so skilled, why he was so famous, why everybody would try to go to him. And you'd stop and you think, well, wait, if you're just holding a baby over a tub of water and you're splashing some water in his face, what's the skill? That wasn't what baptism was. Baptism these days is just symbolic. Back in the day, it was to give you a near-death experience. They would hold you under the water until the bubbles stopped, and they had to know exactly when to pull you up. When you had a near-death experience without actually becoming a death experience. And that, having a near-death experience is a great way, well, maybe not a great way. It's not the preferred method, but it's the natural method of making this encounter with yourself.
True. They touched on that in Constantine. So it's absolutely normal. Let's say I lived in the desert for 10 years, but I didn't have any technique. I didn't have any rituals. But due to what I was experiencing there, I stumbled upon my knowledge and conversation, right?
Yeah, it can happen. It can happen with psychedelics. It can happen with, hell, if you have a bad enough heat stroke, you can anything that produces that gnosis, that level of experience that goes beyond, that kind of removes you from here and gets you into that different frame of mind where you're actually encountering yourself.
Yeah, but the saddest thing about it is the fact that a lot of this seems to stem from surviving trauma. Don't you think?
Yeah.
That a lot of people, that's why a lot of the people that I've met who have undergone some very painful, traumatic things are potentially some of the most spiritual, because their survival mechanism in them has allowed them to commune with something beyond themselves. And they're a lot more spirit oriented because of surviving the trauma. Now, this is not necessarily a invitation for you guys to court trauma. Please don't do that. But
no.
A lot of people who have survived these things end up with a certain level of spirituality to them that cannot just simply be learned. However, it's also safe to say that ritualistic approaches to it, like the Abra Melin, and I don't know what the Thelemic equivalent is. It's Samic, right? Liber Samic?
Yes.
Okay, so Liber Samic, these are also alternates to achieving the same result, so long as you follow the protocol. Am I correct?
Correct.
All right, so when we're done with all of that, we have the Holy Guardian Angel, but the story is not over. We just basically have our spirit companion, right? This is the guy who was kind of like going to support us. Now, tiny digress, how does this differ from the spirit that you get when you got your Palo initiation?
That's a whole different thing. That is a completely different. With Palo, it's like you have a head spirit that's sort of like one of the engineers that's watching over you. It's like you're in his department.
Yeah.
That's a whole different, completely different from this.
Okay, and do they ever clash? Like your HGA tells you one thing, and that head spirit tells you another.
No,
they don't.
No, you would actually be sorted into one of the different head spirits because of who your holy guardian angel is.
Okay, so which brings us to the next. So now that we have our holy guardian angel, the next thing is to prepare for the abyss crossing, right?
Correct.
And are there any known texts or rituals that or practices that actually do that? Because the only thing I heard about it was Aleister Crowley went with Victor Neuenberg into the Algerian desert and confronted Choronzon. Now, it's funny because there's a demon or a spirit named Choronzon in Enochian, and that was also said to be the demon of the abyss itself, or itself. So it's the same thing. So is it prudent to say that working with Enochian is a way of potentially crossing the abyss?
Well, Dee doesn't go into great detail regarding Choronzon.
Mm-hmm.
So he's only mentioned a handful of times.
Mm-hmm.
But the hardest part of the crossing isn't actually confronting Choronzon. The hardest part is getting the preparation correct when you're doing the logical contradictions.
That's if you're doing it the Thelemic way, right? Or the Crowley way.
And here's the thing is that China was closed. They had closed borders for the longest time. So Crowley didn't really have access to Zen koans.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another method is through the use of koans, is confronting logical inconsistencies and trying to make sense of it, but without taking it into a mystical, without going to like big picture, what is your favorite number, 7 or potato? There's no way to really compare them. So sitting and kind of bashing your head against that logical wall repeatedly until you get it. And when you get it, you kind of go past the concept of thesis and antithesis and even synthesis. You go to a state of mind which is beyond those things having to be true. So
here's one thing I'll share on it. Like, this is a very interesting topic. Think of it like, for those of you listening out there about the crossing the abyss, think of your life as like a computer. And the computers have software. They have programming. Even the chips have programs into it. And the logic that Wade is saying is you delete everything, every last bit of data programmed into anything. Now, once it's all gone, you can't log it in, can't turn it on. You basically just have pieces of plastic and metal. If something activates from there, out of nowhere, you got it. In other words, it's like this is practically a divine act already. How do you think about that one?
This is what, in Zen, they call it the no mind. Crowley called it becoming the babe of the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the point that it's like, oh, okay, these two things are logical contradictions. I have tea and no tea at the same time. To take that back to Hitchhiker's Guide for you nerds out there.
Yeah.
If you can have these, hold these logical contradictions and be past the point of needing to make either of them true.
Is it safe
or even past the point of making both of them true?
Is it safe to say the way that the deeper you go down that rabbit hole, the more of a mystical experience it becomes? That you just stop trying to comprehend and you just bask in it?
The comprehension is the point. It's trying to not fall back on mysticism to make sense of these things. To come back and saying, well, one of the earliest Zen koans was these monks were standing outside a monastery, and one of them says, "Oh, look, that flag is moving." Another one says, "No, the wind is moving." And a third one says, "The flag isn't moving and the wind isn't moving, the mind is moving." And you have to stop and actually buzz back and forth between the three of these.
And you gotta let it cook your brain. You gotta let it cook your brain, right? That's why, like, there's like one good example of it is this. If you can find like these riddles, these koans, and get that experience down that you have of when you can't, you're trying to logically contradict and non-contradict things and make sense of that imbalanced non-contradiction. Observe how you react and then understand, oh, okay, it's a systematized lack of a system. Okay.
Yeah, you have to get beyond making sense of things.
Yeah, I get it completely. Somebody said here, I'm life, pure consciousness outside the limitations, in this limited tiny glimpse of reality in which we exist while embodied close. That's what Wade would say. It's, don't even I'm not even trying to claim that I could make sense out of it, because I've never really aspired to do the whole crossing the abyss stuff. I'm just thinking, like, if it happens, it happens. For all I know, 2022 was my abyss crossing and I didn't even know it. Okay. But there's a certain order that comes from the chaos. Am I correct? That it's about learning to work with that chaos.
Yeah, close. it's almost like you've seen fractals.
Yeah.
Even chaos will form patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So becoming the babe of the abyss, achieving no mind, is the beginning of the process.
But not the end.
Now, not the end. It's the beginning of the process. So once you get to this point, which Crowley said could go either way, it could either devolve into genuine madness, or you could become a babe of the abyss. One or the other. But once you've taken the oath, it's gonna go one way or the other. And honestly, at some point you will have to achieve. Even through all the madness.
Yeah, true.
So what you end up with at that point is when you confront Karanzan. And this is, I think, in my opinion, this is where Crowley messed up.
Yeah.
He returned from that mental state and summoned him like a demon and tried to defeat him. He wanted to subjugate Karanzan.
So it's kind of like trying to shoot the administrator of your bar exam test. You know what I mean?
Well, it's kind of like trying to cut your shadow off.
Which is impossible.
It's impossible because it's everywhere you are, even in the dark. Okay? So Crowley thought this was something that could be defeated. And a lot of people, there's a lot of books on shadow work.
Yeah.
And there's actually an excellent book called Owning Your Own Shadow. It's straight psychology, no magic, but I recommend it for every magician. But a lot of people, they say, "Oh, well, I'm very in touch with my shadow. You know, I smoke. I wear a lot of mascara. I'm very cool." It's like they want to accept the cool parts of themselves.
The edgy side, yeah.
Yeah, the scary side, the spooky side. You know, and then you have the other parts, it's just the parts of yourself that nobody wants to acknowledge. And it becomes more difficult when you start dealing with the fact that you've had multiple past lives.
There you go.
And you're having to do work to accept, because this is the power of having made your crossing, is that you become a complete being. This is Luke Skywalker learning the dark side and just rolling in it.
Basically what happens is this is like Luke Skywalker learning both the dark side and the light, and not identifying with anything, not even calling himself a Jedi, just being what he is and knowing to use the Force and not calling it by any dogma. Am I correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's because, I mean, if you look at a lot of the light work, even Thelema, it's all about you're doing good stuff. You don't want to become one of the Black Brothers. You don't want to become, you don't want the darkness. You know, it's all about, it's very light focused. And then you confront Karanzan and you're like, well, wait a minute. I'm confronting all the things about myself, like my entire self, through various lives, all the things that I would never admit about myself.
Sure. There's a very
it's difficult enough to do with this life.
Yeah.
To look back and be like, oh man, remember that time that I found that guy that he was drunk and I just kicked his fucking ass and there was no reason for it. I didn't even rob him. I just did it because I could. You look back at stuff like that and you're like, oh man, that wasn't cool. There's a lot of stuff about each and every one of us that is not cool, but it's who we are.
It's funny because there's a practice in Tantra called Aghori. And the Aghors in India, like, you think that there's these like necrotic guys who eat skeletons and stuff like that, but your experience with it, according to some of the resources I've read, is not necessarily dark always. It's actually to come out with what you're repressing. So like if you're against eating dead things or dead corpses, then the more they'll make you do it. But if you're okay with that, then they won't make you do that at all. Maybe they'll ask you to give food to a charity. So it's really about learning to incorporate all aspects of yourself. So before we wrap up tonight, what are some good texts that our viewers can listen and read into to understand this aspect of crossing the abyss?
For starters, don't. I'm just kidding. I recommend Crowley's work, Liber Os, O-S. But also, a lot of the study of Zen koans. This will get you into the beginning of it. The other book that I mentioned, Owning Your Own Shadow. This is actually a massive topic that we're probably going to end up having to do like a few different episodes on when we don't have a guest.
Too, yeah, we need some guests on this topic too.
It's remarkably difficult finding somebody who's willing to talk about it.
Because you don't want to come off as pompous, because it's like, well, Guru Chief, Frater Ovi, how did you attain enlightenment? Well, enlightenment, you take my course. And it's like, fuck you, man, enlightenment my ass, because it's a very personalized thing. You know what I mean? And you don't want to come off as somebody who's like, well, I know the way to the source, because everybody climbs a tree their own way. But you do recommend some of the Crowley books on it, right?
Yeah, that one specifically, because he references a lot of other material. But again, that is just to get you rolling. The part, one of the reasons why you have to have your holy guardian angel in this is because a lot of times your life is going to come apart. Mm-hmm. You're going to go to pieces when you're doing real shadow work. Mm-hmm. So you need to have one solid core to hang on to. Kind of like you're in the space shuttle and you're coming back into the atmosphere at the wrong angle and you're just shedding parts, peeling off, and the only thing that's left is the cockpit. You have to be in the cockpit for this to work.
One of our viewers said this. Wait, holy cow, I'm still very confused about crossing the abyss. Well, good. That's the start. But discussion has given me an intense, very uncomfortable realization, shadow self stuff, and initiatory level type intensity. I cannot thank you enough for it. Well, we cannot thank you enough for tuning in. So that pretty much concludes tonight's episode of Magic.TV Presents with me and Wade. I am trying to line up our next guest in the next couple of weeks. I won't spoil it who yet, but it's a rather respected internet personality I'm trying to get on, who I think will bring us a lot of wisdom and enlightenment. But for that, also, those of you who are in the Philippines and interested in joining TarotCon, go to tarotconph.com. And at the same time, if you want to support us, please drop us a line at Patreon. We have our donation standing by. Remember, anything you give keeps us going. So, Wade, anything you want to share before we wrap up?
We should probably put this down as part 1.
Yeah, good chance, part 1.
Yeah. So that's something that I think we kind of got to a good jumping off point of getting people started on how to ruin their lives, and then we can kind of walk them through the rest of it, and hopefully get people to the point that they're ready to be.
All right. So that being said, Rob and Wade are signing off. Good night, everyone. Let me just end this and I'll say goodbye.